or should I just get going? Close all the windows. Presentation hygiene is falling behind. Do you have a sense of a number of people attending, David, or should we just
there are 2 people who RSVP'd who I don't see in here so far, so they might join in another minute. But we can also probably start because it's supposed to start at 7. So
we shall start at 7. Well, the wonderful thing about having an intimate crowd is that you guys get to just riff with me while I'm going to go through a bunch of things about AutoEnter Life and Modern FileMaker Revolution, as we are calling it, and hoping that this will be a lively conversation. So I see shout out to Martha, I see Barbara in the house, and I also see Corin Walker. So this is going to be a fun conversation for sure. So a couple quick things. I'm going to try to get up some slides up here. Let's see, how do I do this? Go mute, go to share window. We just practiced this, David. No, I'm all messed up. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Martha, I closed the slides. No, it's good. I just closed the wrong window, so I got to reopen. Be right there. You're going to edit all this out, right? Now that you're editing chops, you know what to do. Let's cut out the first 5 minutes. That's where we go. Okay. Nothing super formal. I just want to give a quick update on.
That's not sharing yet.
How about now?
There it goes.
Okay. Is that working?
Looks good.
Awesome. Yep. So AutoEnter Live. So we had a pretty exciting time. There were over 1,000 people registered, actually 1,400 registered. We peaked at 1,000+ attendees on the virtual platform, which still blows my mind because of my Zoom experience is like maximum 25, and having 1,000 people in chat and going on different stages and different booths virtually and all on the same platform was pretty outstanding. Some highlights, if you weren't there, it's a sight to see 7,000 comments flow past you in one window. And when you have multiple windows running with Discord running and Slack running and other Zoom chats running in the background, being the production house for this whole event, and it really felt like we were in Houston, sitting at the Space Mission Control Center, looking at all these screens and data coming through. So it was pretty wild. So Martha just shared with me that we had 54 countries represented at AEL. So there are a lot of things you can't do virtually that you can do in person. But there's one thing you can do virtually that you can't do in person, which is to really reach out to people who don't normally attend these things. So we're pretty proud of this. I mean, we've got people from Argentina, from Australia, all A to Z's, obviously, and even people from Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, Thailand, Malaysia, the whole gamut. It was pretty crazy, pretty awesome. So besides that, we ran this over 2 days. There were 24 booths, vendors, sponsors, 714 visitors total, people going out and checking out booths. Claris had a booth. That was kind of fun. We had a booth, and a big shout out to our vendors who were there, aka our sponsors. Obviously to the speakers, which I'll recognize in a second, but couldn't have done that without 24U, so Simple, F and Better Forums. I'm not going to name them all, but these were pivotal to making this happen for us. In case you didn't know, this was also done in tight partnership with Soliant, and Claris was a major sponsor, so it wasn't a proof-only production. We couldn't have done it ourselves. Really happy that these teams came together to pull this off. So here's the nut. Here's the crux of it all. If you miss AutoEnter Live and you're wondering where the sessions are, there's a cool little YouTube channel with all the videos from all the sessions uploaded to it. I think it was uploaded as soon as those sessions were over, right? Pretty much. But you can find it there. I'm not going to click on it, but if you want to follow that link, we can also copy paste it, leave the slides out somewhere so you can find it. But go check it out. You can search for it. But there are over 43 speakers. So lots of sessions, 30 sessions. And here's the big manifest of all the cool people who contributed, including David. Thank you very much for being there. Corn's also here. So speakers here galore. And which takes me to sort of in thinking about what AEL AutoEnter Live really represent for us. It's sort of surrounding this idea of what a modern FileMaker community and platform looks like. We've had 2 years of COVID plus. We haven't really gotten together. The world has changed. Things are moving pretty fast, both in the platform space as well as in tech in general. And in some ways, we haven't really gotten together to really talk about what's different, what's new, what's the way forward. So I really felt like AutoEnter Live was this pivotal expression, this coming out, where lots of us have been experimenting with new ideas and new ways to think about FileMaker, and it sort of culminated in this one event. So we're pretty happy with how that turned out. So just a quick preview of some of the sessions that were there. I had a number of favorite ones, obviously, not just these, but been trying to go through all the recordings and definitely check out David's if you want to look at what we're doing at Proof around web stuff with FileMaker. Check out Todd's session and Eric's session, both were pretty cool. But all these sessions was just uniformly just terrific. Very go download. It's free, so go check it out. So I'll pause here and stop presenting. And before I launch into part 2 of this whole conversation, I just want to open up the floor, open it up to the floor to see if there are questions about AutoEnter Live and any feedback, any reactions.
I thought it was really fantastic. I think there was a lot of engagement from the attendees, so it did make it a little more fun than just like watching videos online, because everyone was participating and chatting and commenting. So I thought that was really great, getting that much engagement from the audience.
Yeah, it felt real, right? I mean, it felt like you were live somewhere, even though you weren't actually live delivering the session. Right?
But still being able, I mean, yeah, so, we pre-recorded the videos for it, but we were there talking with the people who were watching the videos and answering questions in real time as people were asking them and watching the video, and then got to go into breakout rooms afterwards to talk some more. And so, I mean, you can watch videos online anytime and people can go back and watch these videos on YouTube, but as a participant and as a presenter, it was a very different experience actually being there versus just checking out the YouTube videos later. So I think that was really good.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully I won't spend so much time doing video editing, because that'll be better, but
I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes. We had set up a couple of sessions. I forgot to give you these stats. We had set up a lazy river and a lobby bar.
There was a lazy river.
Curious if people had gone into them. Every so often, a few people.
Absolutely.
I'll have to actually add up the amount of times, because I think that's fascinating. But 167 people were at the lobby bar, and 265 people were at the lazy river.
That's
so clearly the lazy river is the win.
That's more than what we get more at the lazy river. Yeah, did anyone else go here? I mean, I know obviously Corn and Martha and Barbara, you guys were there, but Zach, did you get a chance to?
No, didn't. Just wanted to clarify, this wasn't like a replacement to DEF CON, or what? This was purely community hosted?
So this was not an official Claris event, right? But they were a mainline, top billings sponsor, so to speak. We couldn't have done it without the actual support, marketing and other things.
I just didn't know if they renamed DEF CON or something.
No, but this is this is not a Claris Inc. production. This is very much a Proof and Slide production. Is it
if I can
please,
sorry, if I could chime in. I was busy working all day watching the session. It's just great to bounce back and forth between different sessions and just not have to worry about just listening to it. It's cool. And if it was, I'm not sure how the remote Claris events were. I didn't bother with those, but this platform was pretty slick. Like, it was really cool to just the way everything was presented, and even other presenters had opportunities to do promos and upsells. It was cool. It was a great way to spend the day, just kind of having one screen on the side and doing the rest of your stuff.
That's what we do anyway, right? So might as well be doing this. Absolutely. Yeah. Amos, did you get a chance to go?
Yes, I did.
Awesome.
So FileMaker for me has been kind of my hobby job since version 2.1. So I'm an engineer by trade and do machinery design.
Nice.
But I build databases for small businesses is just because I love it. I've been to a lot of different events lately, in the industry that I normally work in, and this was by far the best event that I've attended, like virtually. The interaction is huge, and that's what a lot of these other events they just don't get. They do all the stuff pre-recorded, and then there's no way to actually really connect with people. And this event I thought was really well done in that respect. It was nice to be able to throw questions up there and know that there are actually people right on the other side of the world, wherever they are, able to answer them quickly. And it was good.
Yeah, I miss it. It was such a, the day after AutoEnter, it really felt like, man, I could do this all day, just sit around and talk to people and be on the hop, and it was cool. So I mean, I hope we get to do it again. I think that it's a format that that's conducive to sharing ideas, not just with the same few people that we know every year at DEF CON or Engage, but perhaps with a much wider, broader audience. Right? So call this version 1. All right, I'm going to segue a little bit because I want to talk about a couple of ideas that are part of this whole AutoEnter Live conversation. Let me share a window. I'm Zoom fluent, so I'm trying to learn Meet, and all my buttons are in the wrong place, but that's okay. I am a strong and capable man. Here we go. Got to minimize that puppy. Okay, so this is I'm just gonna cheat.
Not sharing yet.
I will be coming in 1 second. There we go.
Okay.
This is. Is that working?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So this was actually a deck that I had in our booth. So for those of you who attended and you were able to come sit with us or visit with us, you might have seen a lot of this already. So I'm not actually going to go through the whole presentation. I mean, I'm going to try to make this available online. You can download it. I just want to touch on a couple of core ideas that's kind of motivating us, and we're trying to find language for, and trying to share these concepts with people. And this is a deck that I put together to kind of pull a lot of these core ideas into one place. right? And I'm going to skip through a bunch of things, but you're going to see a lot of text that fly by, but I'll give you the synopsis of it, which is the premise is we're in a very different place today, technology-wise, as well as society. And the old ways of doing things, we have to rethink fundamentally. I know it's a very big statement. It's a big, hairy, audacious idea, but I do think it's fundamentally true. Because if there's one thing I've learned from watching what's happening with COVID and watching the world sort of react, businesses react to it, we're in a, if not fully virtual, at least a hybrid environment now. People don't work in the same place. They work like AutoEnter Live. They work from everywhere. They come from everywhere. And then business systems and applications also don't live in one place. They're in the cloud. They're on-prem. They're a mix of the two, and they're connected. Right? So the question for us as developers is, what do we do? Right? The old ways of counting on on-prem servers, of working inside a local network and architecting for that kind of performance threshold, those days are kind of gone. Right? So that's the core premise. So the idea here is that this is really a kind of, there's a call to action here. Right? Not just for my team, our team, but for the whole community, for the whole developer community at large that's been working with FileMaker. And the way I'm thinking about this is that we have to find language for this new way of building FileMaker applications and thinking about FileMaker or Claris, the platform at large, that's rooted in modern ideas. It's not to say that all the things we've learned with FileMaker are obsolete, right? But there are ways we need to implement new designs and new architectures that are going to be foundational to how we succeed and how we add value to businesses who are changing and people's lives and workflows who are fundamentally different today. Right? So I call this a revolution. I call this a revolution about changing the way we work and think and implement and build FileMaker systems. I do want to assert that the core assumption here, and I think it's bearing out, is that the Claris platform, including FileMaker Server and FileMaker Pro, also Connect and Studio, I mean, they are really well positioned to operate in this modern space. The platform really isn't the problem, right? The question is, are we able to do that? Are our skill sets, our practices, our ideas, are they consistent with a modern way of thinking about application development and software development in general? Custom software specifically, but not just custom software, right? So what we're calling the Modern FileMaker Revolution is this idea, it's a philosophy, it's a practice of using FileMaker in a way that is operative in a very networked environment, and it's built for scale, and it's really focused on connecting people and software and systems. All right, what does it really mean? All right, for me, it's kind of a feeling. If you're building modern FileMaker solutions, they feel really agile, they feel fast, they feel connected, and they're designed for a modern workforce. And it has these attributes that feel very much closer to modern web applications or mobile applications than traditional desktop applications or ERP software, et cetera, right? It's less SAP as the model and more, say, QuickBooks Online, if you will. Maybe that's not a good example, but you get the idea, right? It's more a modern cloud-centric experience than the old ways of thinking about having a desktop application, downloading files, and installing updates that way, and so forth and so forth. Right? The question is, how do we go about doing this? And really, what's wrong with the current model? Right? I think about this question. The way I frame this approach is by saying something like, that there are a number of core features or strategies. The first is, it's not modern if it's not cloud first. And that's an important constraint, which means if you're developing for the desktop experience for a LAN environment. You're not developing so that it can live in the cloud first, deployed in a server that's not hosted behind, a server closet in the physical building, or your physically owned building, where with limited access to people around the world. Then it's probably not modern enough. And it's not just where you host it, right? It has to be developed so that it's highly performant on the cloud. So that's one of the core attributes here. And to do that, you have to start thinking about a loose coupling as the core development strategy. So if your monolithic ERP solution has 100 tables and your relationship graph depth can stretch to 6, 7, 8 tables deep, that's not quite loosely coupled, right? Loosely coupled means that the solution can interface with other solutions, other applications, not through the graph in FileMaker speak, but through APIs or through scripts or through REST services, etc., etc. So the coupling is not in the structure. The coupling is in protocols, and it's loose by definition because it's in publicly addressable protocols. So the other piece of this is that in order to do the first two, you have to adopt a modern development practice. You have to be able to ship quickly. You have to be able to iterate, make changes quickly, and test and deploy. And that is something that a lot of us, I think, are still not quite used to. So if you're still developing in a live FileMaker system and just telling your users, yeah, I put a new feature in, just it's there now, go check it out. I think those days need to be numbered, if not numbered already, right? And the reason is it's not modern if it's not reliable. It's not reliable if it's not testable, right? It's not testable if you don't build it to test, and so forth and so forth. There's this whole chain of dependencies that need to happen in order for all these things to come true. And the last piece, and this is somewhat controversial, is that instead of, I say, employ and integrate web technologies. I mean a lot of things there. I mean, use REST, use JSON, use web components, use JavaScript. But it's not just using these things for the sake of using these things. The way I think about this is something like, if you're doing gymnastics in FileMaker, we used to build like buttons out of individual pixels or have magic portal tricks to kind of create an experience that we feel is quote unquote modern in FileMaker, where there's no native control. If you're doing that still in FileMaker because you're trying to achieve an effect or a user experience that you find that you have an analog for in some other modern system, and you're trying to hack it in FileMaker using FileMaker native things that's not kind of natively supported to do, that's probably not a good idea. I would encourage using better web technologies, components that you can plug into it and leverage things that are designed to do those kinds of gymnastics properly. Right, so there might be some upskilling to be had, but the idea is that we want to use FileMaker where FileMaker is really good at, and not use FileMaker to do things it's not very good at doing. So I kind of touch on some of this in my earlier spiel, and I'll kind of fly through this pretty quickly. But if you haven't played with JSON or REST or OData in FileMaker, this is probably the time to really think about adding that to your repertoire. OData is actually very interesting because it supports the transaction-like way of sending data around using FileMaker Server. Right, so you can send batches and updates and whatnot in batches, and that's quite important. But at Proof, we do almost everything via JSON objects in terms of parameter passing, in terms of decoupling our solution so that we're not using the graph as much. The common object protocol, so to speak, is JSON. The way we encode data is JSON. The way we express objects is JSON. The way we represent other objects or other data packets from other sources, it's JSON. Very, very important. And we also have a practice of requiring everything to be, to go through a proper software development lifecycle, meaning you have to have a dev server, you have to have a staging server, optionally, but at least a dev server, and you need to be able to deploy to it using the data migration tools. And if you have auto, this is all kind of supported with Migrator, but if you don't, that's cool. You can, there are other tools out there to do that, but do something. Use Git if you have to, but deploy is important. And then circling back to loosely coupled, our apps in general are too big and too heavy. We like complexity, and simple is very hard. So don't sneeze at simple. Simple is actually harder, right? But what we have to do to be modern is to make smaller, more lightweight things that are easier to change and easier to iterate through. That means a lot of things. That means that UI needs to be more lightweight. That means the choices we make about what we put on these layouts and how we express them need to be lighter, need to have less moving parts, need to be simpler, need to feel simpler, need to be more robust. And this is very hard. This is not easy to do, but this is foundational. If I'm looking at some other solution that we're inheriting, and if we have to, if it's not supportable because it's so complex that we don't know where to start, that's a problem. But in order to avoid that, we have to first build it to be supportable, to be lightweight, to be modular, right? And so some of the old strategies still apply here. Right? If you were coming in from a separation model kind of practice, separation is still good, or separation strategies are still good. If not, the separation implementation itself, the thinking around separation still applies. Separation of concerns is really foundational, right? And the way we do a lot of separation these days is through APIs. Now, they don't have to be in separate files, but there should be interfaces through scripts where other FileMaker apps are making calls against, rather than trying to write things directly to, your standalone application. Right? And I kind of summarize this by saying we need to avoid monoliths, right? So if you're used to building very, very big systems where it does everything under the sun, try thinking about chunking it out, making smaller pieces of it. Won't get into this too much, but again, dev, stage, deploy, and have tools to support that. That should just be common parlance and common practice. And testing's important. I like to promote the idea of writing tests. And I think people get a little bit crazy about trying to write unit tests for everything. This is not really what I mean. But the way we think about tests is that if you can script a way of checking whether your expected behavior is actually passing every time you make some changes, then a lot of testing can be repeated, becomes repeatable. And repeatable means that you can actually do proper, development, to do proper sort of a build and deploy practice, right? Because if the problem with testing is that if you're manually testing and you're testing it by hand each time, you're going to miss things. So scripting it, making it repeatable is foundational. Talked about this already. So I skipped a bunch of stuff, but I want to get to this point. So one of the things that got dropped at AutoEnter Live was this new vision of Studio. They demoed Studio and its latest release or incarnation, and it was pretty freaking cool. Frankly, it did a lot more than I thought they were going to be able to show in such a short time since the first demo of it. So I was quite impressed. And I know a little bit about Studio, but even I didn't know as much as they were showing at AutoEnter Live. So this was new stuff and really cool stuff. And I think if you're a FileMaker developer in this space, you might be a little bit worried about Studio and what that means to you. And the way I look at it is that Studio is not going to replace Pro anytime soon. You know, not in the next few months, not in maybe not a year, maybe not 2 years, I don't know, and maybe not ever, right? It's a fundamentally different beast, an important one. It's really the first cloud-centric, cloud-first platform on this brand that we'll have access to. And in theory, it should draw in a lot more people to the platform, and that's important to us. You know, we need this platform to grow, and it's not really going to grow by just selling more FileMaker Pros. And I think it's the right strategy. So I see it as an opportunity for us to expand the platform. And the conceit here is that your cloud-first solutions may actually start in Studio in the future, not in Pro. And then Pro becomes your professional programming environment for, you know, heavy lifting the heavy lifts that you have to do to get data in and out, to do workflows, to build more complex UIs, and so forth. Right? So I'll leave it at that, and that is Modern FileMaker in a nutshell. If you want to get started with loose coupling, I really recommend that you check out this thing that we are releasing and have released for free. It's called SimpleQ. It's a messaging system that allows you to, it's all native FileMaker, so that's a cool thing. So if you've done anything with Amazon Web Services like SQS, or you've done Redis, this will be somewhat familiar to you, right? So the idea here is that rather than to connect FileMaker applications together through the graph, we kind of link them through messages. You need a way to, it's like an inbox that's smart about subscribers to itself, right? So the idea here is that with SimpleQ, you can start to take monoliths, and instead of trying to overload your ERP system, you can write a whole separate app and use this app, and you put SimpleQ in between the ERP system and your app, and it will broker the messages back and forth between the two using JSON. That's a kind of simple explanation. Now, the cool thing is we're using this today in production. We have millions of messages that have been passed through. We integrate our CRM, which is Pipedrive. We integrate a bunch of things, including QuickBooks, into SimpleQ. And we use FileMaker to be kind of the glue for all this data that's coming in. This is literally how we're fusing our business intelligence into a single place. So check it out. Happy to answer questions about it while I'm here. And I know Corn's here too, so you have all of us. Stop. Sure. All right. So I'm hoping that we, if you have any thoughts on this stuff, I'd love to have a conversation with you all and just take the rest of our time to just kind of riff around some of these ideas. That's it.
I think that was really good. Thanks a lot. Queues are a great thing that I think FileMaker could benefit more from, because it kind of allows you to do more asynchronous processing. If you have long-running tasks and jobs or things you don't really want the user to have to wait for, but you have to get them done. And if it's not running through your script in Pro, then like, how is it going to get done, right? So making queues is a good way to pass that off to a separate worker machine that's going to take care of those jobs for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had an interesting use case for SimpleQ. So I had this strange API that when you did a post, they didn't actually process your post for 10 minutes. So I would do a post and then do a get, and the get wasn't reflective of anything that I had changed because the post really didn't take. I think our guess was they actually have two databases, one for the UI and one for the API. And there's something that happens. So I did SimpleQ, doing the post, and then sent a message to SimpleQ in 10 minutes, please go do the get.
Right. That's cool.
And it was perfect. And so 10 minutes later, it does the get. And then that gets passed off to an API that processes the result. So that was my use of SimpleQ. And I couldn't think of any other way I was going to do that. How do you wait 10 minutes? How do you tell the user, oh, by the way, in 10 minutes, you're going to go click this? It wasn't even doable. And then I found another endpoint that was like a day later.
Right.
So some of the APIs can be pretty challenging. They don't necessarily think like FileMaker people.
Yeah, I mean, we're spoiled, right? I mean, we're spoiled because
We're used to
notifications
that.
are very instantaneous. We're not used to waiting. But waiting is the web game. I mean, whether you like it or not, you're waiting. You just don't think you are because it's well designed.
And I know there's a lot of, I don't know, they're sort of updating a summary table or something like that, that the user doesn't have to wait for to happen. So you could just say, pass that off, like you say, more of a queuing system, pass that off to be done. So there's that happy place between a server-side script that runs nightly and something you need to have happen, but it doesn't, I don't want it to have to be nightly. And so there's definitely a place for it. And I'm trying to keep my eyes open for more uses of it. Certainly as you integrate with more things, it becomes obvious what you're going to use it.
Yeah, for me, the main thing here is that it allows us to push objects from one place to another place, right? So it allows us to represent a data as objects and not as a database structure that has to be, well, first you have to coerce it into some packet or object, or if you're using it natively in FileMaker, then it's about a lot of graph work to kind of represent those results in the list or in a report or something, right? So that's usually when people say FileMaker is slow, that's usually what's happening, right? I go to the layout and I have 10 fields, and that 10 fields come from 50 different databases, or 6 relationships deep, right? And you can't find, you can't sort, but that's your data. You want that to be your data because that's you're going to build it once. You don't want to repeat yourself, right? But what we're really saying is that maybe you want to repeat yourself. The problem in the past is repeating yourself was expensive. But with SimpleQ, repeating yourself is not that expensive. Repeating yourself is just getting an object to represent the data that you need for that report. And then when you do it, that report's just really super lightweight. All that data's in that file or on that table that you need to draw on. Super fast. Zach, I can see your wheels turning.
No, I'm curious, how much do you guys use native FileMaker for like application development? I am in a shop where I develop in FileMaker. There is no web direct. I do FileMaker development.
We do a lot. We do more than 50% of our development in FileMaker.
Because you mentioned earlier, when you save and you tell your users to go check out the save or whatever, for me, that is the value of FileMaker. When we start getting into building APIs, I struggle to find the relevance of FileMaker. I don't know if that's something that I'm misunderstanding. But when I start saying, well, I'm going to build APIs on top of this, at that point, I'm almost like, I should just use an open source database instead, because then I don't have to go through all the restrictions of, layout navigation to get my data.
Yeah.
Am I missing something greater, or do you have anything to speak on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is an important point, right? So I am absolutely saying that you want FileMaker to be FileMaker. You want the user experience to be very nimble, lightweight, like what, like very clean FileMaker applications that we start building. When we start up building, we build very simple, clean applications that just do beautiful things, and then they get complicated, right? What I'm also saying is that when they get complicated, you have to be careful about how you add complexity to FileMaker, and you want to add complexity in the right places. So I don't mean make APIs necessarily in FileMaker. Sometimes we do, because we have backend FileMaker systems that we need other applications to interface with, right? And so one way to do it is just fire up the relationship graph and just kind of suck in all the tables, and presto, you've duplicated your graph objects from this system to another system. And then if something breaks in system A, you got to kind of redo everything in system B. And then if you add 2 more systems, now you got 4 systems you have to maintain, right? So let me back up for a second. So this is the classic use case. Let's say you have a contact object, a model, and it's made up of 3 tables. You have the person table, you have addresses, and you have, phone numbers, whatever, right? Very simple. That's your object. The contact is made of 3 tables, right? And you wire it one way in graph in solution A, and you repeat the wiring on the graph in solution B, because you have to replicate it. You don't copy. There's no way of saying, take this and bring an alias of that model into my other system. You're literally redoing that work in system B. Well, you say, well, it's cheap, it's easy to do, I can do it, it's FileMaker. Great, that's a FileMaker way. And some other person comes to you and says, oh, I need another solution, and I need the contact. I say, I know how to do contact. I'm going to use this database. I'm going to rewire the same thing in a 3rd database that I just built. So now you've got 3 places where you've done the same relationship graph work 3 different times. And then customer A says, you know what, this is great, but I have 10 addresses, and then change the model. So you change it in solution A. What happens to solution B and solution C? Well, you're screwed, because you have no idea which one's authoritative now. And not only that, the way that data gets persisted, because they're modeled differently in different solutions, is different. So then you're wondering, why is this data wrong when someone saves that record in that solution, and why are they fighting each other? Well, this is it. We have this dependency problem that's interlinked, right? So I'm saying, maybe what you want to think about is, if you have a persistent store of context and you want to expose that in a way that doesn't introduce anomalies to other applications, then you want to have a common interface that's not at the model level, but you want a programming interface to access that data. That's what we do in the web. That's what we do with other systems. That should be what we do in FileMaker as well, right? Is that 90% of the use cases? No. But when it does become relevant, it becomes real, right?
Yeah.
If I can comment, Zach, maybe I threw you off, because we use terms around here that I realize that are sort of Proof+Geist terms to some extent. So when I talk about pass off to an API, I actually meant a transactional FileMaker script.
Oh, okay.
I refer to those as APIs.
Okay.
So that response that came back from the get might update an order and order lines. And so because it's going to touch more than one record, I want that wrapped in a transaction. And those scripts receive JSON in, process the records transactionally, and return, just like an API, web API, a result of, I don't know, list of IDs, the status success, or an error. So we think that way in FileMaker, but it's still native FileMaker. It's just a script.
Yeah, that's so important. I think often when we say API, Barbara, people think we mean REST API. We just mean an interface, a script, essentially. In most cases in FileMaker, that becomes to where you talk, that you ask questions about or send messages to one file to another file, right? Yeah, thank you for that. Did I scare everybody away?
Nope.
Hey, I'm still here. Good. What other questions do you have?
I will ask.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, I guess FileMaker, in a world where stuff like AppSmith and maybe other open source
OutSystems,
low-code things So I have found that like there is kind of a kickback. So people are there's kind of a realization that these low code environments are valuable to productivity. FileMaker has always been there, right? You know, Apple's always been ahead of the game, just always. But you know, with recent years in terms of what they removed, like runtime environments, and there's this move to more web technologies. You have more experience than I do with sort of low code, these new emerging techs.
Is the question, what is my experience with them? Or I missed what you...
No, it's just you have more experience than I do. So my gut reaction to AppSmith being a thing is that, oh, wow, this is going to take over the industry, right? But FileMaker is tried and true, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not saying, I'm not trying to start, you know, a holy war of whether we should jump ship or anything. I'm just saying, like, you know, what's your...
My assessment is that this is a very volatile space. Low code is still fairly new. Adoption is still fairly low. There's not there is adoption. I mean, you have AppSmith and tons of different apps, but that's also part of the problem. You have a lot of players competing for the same pie, and the results are often mixed. So low code means a lot of things, right? So you got things that are close to FileMaker and that you can actually use them to actually build real apps, and then you got things like close to Airtable, which is ostensibly low code, but in a very, very, very low code kind of way, almost like no code kind of way, right? And so but that's the problem, right? There is the space is littered with platforms that have varying degrees of ceiling to them. You know what I mean, right? So if you start with Airtable, you can only go so far with it, then you're kind of stuck. And then you start with some other thing like Retool, and then maybe it's much harder to get started with Retool, and then you're also stuck because then you can't port that stuff outside, or you can't, you know, with Retool maybe it's a little easier, but you get what I mean, right? Different platforms have different constraints, and none of them have the same number of constraints. So they all are terrible in some way. I mean, this is the problem, and you know, and they all have strengths in some ways, right? So my view is that it's still maturing, and we're just at the cusp of this low code, this real low code movement that's going to make real change, right? The market's still very, very big, and it's changing. The needs are changing pretty dramatically. So what we think of as low code today won't be what we think of as low code tomorrow, right? I'll give you an example. A lot of people who use low code stuff today still think in terms of data models, because that's what we're used to. We're still thinking about drawing tables, making databases. I think the low code of the future, you shouldn't even care about databases. That's not a thing. It's not something, it's not a domain of concern. You know, but are the design services representative of that? Not quite there yet, because you have business objects that still need to be represented. And how do you express that to the user, right? I don't see a clear winner out there quite yet. What I do see is that with FileMaker, there's basically no ceiling, right? You can do very complex things, and then and you can add on web stuff if you need to. And so there are escape hatches along the way. So you can start very light with FileMaker and really grow it, and people don't feel stuck, right? But first, you got to build it that way. So if you build your solution in such a way that your customer is stuck or your client's stuck, then you're doing them a disservice. So that's the intentionality that we have to bring to this game.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a question. So the applications that I build are, by your definition, monolithic. They're not huge, so they don't do a lot of things. But I'm trying to wrap my head around how I would change how I do things to take advantage of like this loosely coupled thing. So I'm looking for maybe an example of a solution for a customer that could be monolithic and all with the relationship graph, and then how I would break that into smaller chunks and decouple it. So like, for example, I have a customer that has a recycling business. They buy scrap metal.
Yeah.
And so they have customers that come in. So I'm gathering customer information. They're buying scrap metals. So I'm gathering transactional, you know, every time they come, I'm collecting the weights of the metals and giving, you know, having prices for the metals and writing checks to the customers. So I have that piece of it. How would I decouple that, and what would be the reason I would want to do that?
So this gets into some really deep nuances, and I'm going to try to.
Okay.
And this is a license for you to reach out to me, and we can riff on this separately over coffee or something, and I can kind of show you some of the core ideas. But I'll try to cut it down to a couple core ideas. First, when I say decouple, I don't necessarily mean that your UI needs to be fragmented into different files. Like, I don't mean, oh, invoicing goes here, customers go there, payments go to a different file or different screen or whatever. I don't mean just have single purpose user interfaces, right? I mean, the UX is whatever the design requires. Does that make sense? So
yes.
Design first.
Yes.
Right. Design for the user, don't design for the system. Right.
Right.
If your user needs a mobile application experience where you have tab controls and your invoicing, everything is in one space,
yeah,
that's the design requirement. Whether or not your invoicing system is married to your inventory system at the graph level, where you are building joins every which way, that is a separate question, right? And what I'm encouraging is that we're very light on those kinds of joins, that we only model, we use joins mostly for modeling purposes, not so much for deep UI work that need to pull from lots of different relationships all the time that you have to manage. Right, so this is a little bit simplistic, but that's one way to think about decoupling, right? Is to say, hey, try to get the data from the source and represent it on the screen in a disconnected way. That don't rely on the graph to drive all your UI data requirements, because then you're building filters on it, you're doing all kinds of complex stuff, and it gets really gnarly. That's
I think I can give a good example too of how a big monolithic system could be split up into smaller pieces using something like queues and messaging and API calls, things like that. We built a system for a customer many years ago, back in 2011, so it's pretty old at this point. Still running great. Built it in FileMaker 12 or something, you know. But it's grown over time. It's pretty big. And this customer, they have a sales and CRM side, and they work with the customers. They track their interactions, email sends, phone calls, all sorts of communication, marketing opportunities, all those sorts of things. They place the sales in there, and then it goes to a production facility, which takes those orders and the line items and the products that have been put in the system, and they manage the production process to fulfill those orders and shipping and things like that. And you know, there's some parts that manage the different steps of the manufacturing process, you know, gathering the materials and things that they need to actually produce the products. And it works fine, but it's a very monolithic system. It's really big, and it's handling these two pretty separate areas of the business. And the manufacturing production side, they don't really need to know that much about the sales and the CRM and the leads and all those sort of things. But it's in one FileMaker system, and it's got a big, giant relationship graph, and it's all dependent on these things being connected. So we could split it into two files and then kind of link the databases, I guess, back and forth. But then we have to have authentication in both files. You know, users who are logging into the warehouse need to have credentials that also work in the sales file. That's kind of a pain. If we're making changes in the relationship graph on the sales side, then we have to reproduce that on the manufacturing side as well. And we have to keep, again, 2 separate files, 2 separate relationship graphs. But if we can split that up and just send a message from the sales side that says, we've made a sale, here are the things that you need to produce, here's where it's going, please take care of it. All we need to do is send that piece of data from the sales system to the production system. The production system doesn't need the relationship graph back to the sales side, doesn't need all that customer information and all those records. They don't need the credentials. We don't have to maintain it as things get changed in the sales side. As long as we always send the data in the same format, the production side is always going to be there ready to receive it in the same format, and will process it and do its own thing. And so it splits that into smaller sections. They can operate a little more independently. They don't need to have the giant relationship graph on each side. They're a little insulated from changes that we might need to make from one system to the other. And we don't have to have credentials that work across files, or now maintaining 2 sets of user logins, or even dealing with single sign-on and having to maintain groups and things like that in both files, because it's just one piece of information, you know, one JSON object going from one system to the other. And as long as it's in the right format, everything's going to keep working.
Okay, so then in your example, which is a great example, I'm assuming then the line items that you had in the sales side are now becoming duplicated on the manufacturing side as an order with its own line items. Like it's a second copy of the data, but the way it's sent back and forth is managed transactionally so that they're always the same. But, you know, instead of having a live link from the production side to the sales side for those line items, you're assuming that you're just handing it over, and now production is going to take it and move forward with it.
Yep,
There's
but
no reason
that's
for a live link back to the sales side.
Yeah, and I think that's okay, because the 2 different sides need to know different information about the line items as well. So the sales side, they might need to know if they've edited these line items before, or if they did a quote, if this came from a previous quote and was adjusted. On the manufacturing side, they need to, you know, and on the sales side, they need to know the prices and if any discounts have been applied, you know, and what kind of categories these products fall into for lead generation in the future. On the manufacturing side, all they care about is like the product ID, how many they need. And then they've got their own things that they need to think about, like, have we produced this one yet? What stage of production is this item in our production process? Sales doesn't care about it. Sales has things that manufacturing doesn't care about. And by splitting it, now we don't have to keep track of those things and be loading all that information on the records on both sides. We can build more on the manufacturing side for the manufacturing specific bits of information that they need or related data, and we don't care about it on the sales, and vice versa.
Here's the thing that I would watch for. I find this particularly true with actually very experienced FileMaker developers, you know, like myself. You know, we tend to gravitate towards more generalization in our systems, right? Because I can just store all order items in a general line items table, and we'll just overload it because I write it once. I have a single way of adding records to it, getting data from it, and so forth, and I can use filters as whatnot to get the data I need, right? So we tend to go towards abstraction and more generalized data models. Party model is a version of this problem, right? And that's actually going towards monolithic design, because then you have this very complicated systems, very complicated models, very complicated objects, and the actual problem you're trying to solve in any department or problem space, logical space, it's actually one version of that, right? One slice of that scenario, and then you have to do backflips to kind of make it simple from that very complicated model. In a decoupled way, we start more local. We start simpler. We start with the local model as primary, and we worry about, eventual consistency eventually. Right, so it's a different way of thinking about modeling and design. Now, you may have some authoritative data store or persistent store for your context. It's very complicated, but we're not accessing that or talking to it through the graph. We're not kind of remodeling the graph. That's all. That will take an object, a JSON object, or through a script or whatever, and our simple, sales ordering system can do what it needs to do, but it can store the data in quote unquote the correct way in that complex system, downstream, upstream.
Guys, I have one question with this messaging thing. Do you still need the same users across all apps, or just the script needs, like, there still needs to be some commonality? So if you got 3 apps, like your UI, your transaction layer, and then the database?
No. Corn's actually here, so if Corn wants to talk about how the user auth works, you're welcome to. Maybe he's here, maybe he's not.
Maybe I'm here. Maybe.
Oh, there you are.
No. So the basics behind Simple Queue's implementation, at least, is that you do have to have some shared credentials to be able to send and receive messages, because Simple Queue needs to connect with your FileMaker file, and so it's going to need some credentials to open it. But the basics of those credentials is just running a script. So it's going to pass that message as a script parameter, and then your script can do whatever it needs to do. Whether it needs to elevate credentials from what Simple Queue used, or it could do run with admin access, whatever it is. It will need credentials to be able to process that message, but not for sending and receiving messages. For sending and receiving messages, it can be very basic credentials that only have the access to run that one script if you want.
All right, so you don't have, so if you don't need all your users kind of replicated. You can just use a very small set to manage it that way. Cool. All right, thanks. Because I was trying to find it in the docs. I couldn't really find it before I downloaded the demo.
Well, that'll be something I'll need to add to the docs then.
Yeah, we should add that. There's a lot of documentation, so.
No, but I like that. I like this concept. That I think I've heard Todd talk about it before, like just putting a lot of scripting in a file as one way of separating. And then that way you can repurpose it when you bolt on other apps that might have some level of uniqueness, but you're not importing all your scripts and then having to be, oh, I made an update, let me go and support the other scripts that are relying on this kind of functionality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, modern FileMaker is more script. It's more scripting and less graph work. It's kind of how I think about it. So the burden of responsibility has shifted to the scripting surface rather than at the graph level.
Yeah, and then you're saying the asynchronous thing, that's going to really start becoming a bigger thing?
It absolutely will be. It already is. I mean,
yeah, like with some of the web devs I work with, some of the solutions, they're looking at, we need to make things more asynchronous so we're not waiting forever and then possibly having timeout sessions. So that's kind of cool to hear that it's also going to be an important part in FileMaker.
Yep. Yeah, don't be afraid of async. I mean, to be clear, we're not quite at the place where we can be truly async yet. There are still some things that we need, but we're close. But we can be loosely coupled first, and we can have asynchronous messaging, in the sense that you can have one system send a message and not have to wait on the message wait on a notification to come back. That can happen today, right? We still need events to be a first-class thing in FileMaker and FileMaker Server, and hopefully that's coming. So we're going to get help, I think.
Well, very cool. I think this has been a really great presentation, and we've had lots of interesting questions and discussion, and kind of, Ernest, you've provided a lot of really good answers to some of the concerns that have been brought up from these questions as well. I think the techniques that you've illustrated are very useful, and we'll all be trying to implement a lot of those things in our solutions going forward. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks for having us. See you guys.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
So everyone here knows too, our meetings are on the first Wednesday of each month at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're always looking for presenters and topics. If you have anything that you'd like to see a presentation on, send me an email. It's david@bluefeathergroup.com. If you have something that you'd like to present or share, we would love to have you do that. But like I said, even if you don't have something that you want to present yourself, if there's something you'd like to hear about, let us know. We'll try to get someone who is knowledgeable on that topic who can do the presentation. So everyone's welcome to join. If you want to get on the mailing list, we send out meeting reminders before each meeting. So send me an email as well, and we'll get you on there so that you can get the notice with the topic and presenter before each month.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it as always.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. See you.
Bye.